Hi everyone, Spencer Pauly here today with the Center Square's Eastern Washington reporter, Tim Clouser. Tim, you and I are in the midst of budget season here. We're always busy around this time, especially with Spokane and Seattle, working to pass their new budget. So two of Washington's biggest cities just did such, and it's built on new taxes. Yet both have multi-year forecasts that, I don't want to say it's apocalyptic, but it is definitely bad news carrying into 2027. So let's start off with Spokane because this happened Monday. Spokane filled a $13 million budget deficit with the help of new and increased taxes. Can you just tell me what these taxes are? Let's start off with that.
Yeah, so the taxes really help the council and the mayor push this budget through the door without spending going in the red. But with that, they significantly raised the cost of living for local residents. First, through a new parking tax. This didn't require voter approval, so the council, with less than a month's notice, pushed this through the door with minimal stakeholder outreach ahead of time. But essentially, it's a 12% parking tax that applies on top of all other state and local taxes. So in Spokane, you have a tax rate of, I'm not going to get the exact percentage here, but around 9%. So that would put a 12% parking tax on top of that 9%, on top of the fees that you're paying at these parking lots, which vary depending on the time of day. So if you're going to Riverfront Park, on the weekend at a peak hour, you could be paying significantly more than at the daytime. And I've heard from a few residents who visit downtown Spokane multiple times a week, and they said, with me visiting 4 or 5 times a week, I mean, this could increase my cost by over $200. With 12% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you pan it out like that, that's significant. And there are exemptions lowering it to 6% for certain lots, and exemptions for, I believe, employees working downtown and students and other ones. But the parking tax was significant and was vehemently opposed by the business community and residents. I was flicking through dozens, and I mean dozens of letters from the community sent to the mayor and council this morning, opposing the tax, calling on them to push it, but they passed it 5-2 anyways. And that's the same vote for the utility tax increase. They raised the city's utility tax by 0.5% in the utility rates with it, which takes it to 21.5%, the highest, if not among the highest, utility tax rate in the state. And they did it on the back of saying, look, this is a temporary tax increase. So essentially they're saying, look, we have a budget deficit this year. If we increase the rates 0.5%, it'll bring us an extra $1.5 million annually. But this time next year, we'll end the tax altogether. So you won't have to pay it anymore. This is what they're promising. And then what? 2023 heading into 2024, former Mayor Meeting Woodward proposed a similar utility tax increase. Proposed this tax increase, promising to sunset a year from now or a year from then. And then last year, when they were balancing another deficit, the council took that sunset clause away. So for them to promise that they're going to take this utility tax away a year from now is hard to believe, considering they did the same thing last year and ultimately declined to do so in the end.
It just sounds a lot like what's going on in Seattle here. We're going to keep seeing these budget deficits linger on and on. Now, Spokane, they did cuts to staffing, right? Do you have that number? They made layoffs, correct?
Yeah. So last month, Mayor Lisa Brown, she sent a letter to city staff saying, look, with the budget deficit, cuts alone aren't going to get us here, like she and the city administrator said in prior meetings. So she warned that 20 to 50 positions might be cut to close their spending gap. And in the end, they only cut, I believe it was 15 positions citywide. That's what the city's communication director told me. And those are across a few departments, but substantially less than they had anticipated. But again, that's on the back of this deficit or barely closing. I mean, in passing this budget, they left a fiscal cliff in a sense in the future, because one of the areas that they considered cutting personnel was in the council office directly, which significantly increased its overhead in the last few years. But instead of making those cuts, They decided to put some bridge funding to get them through half of 2026, but come July, there's still not enough funding to keep everyone in the council office. So they either need to find out how they're going to fund the rest of the year for these staff members, whether it be through reserves or other means, or they're going to have to cut them down the road. So not the greatest situation that they've created for themselves. It balances a deficit this year, but much of the council is anticipating another deficit next year already. And that's what the two conservatives on the council said last December when they closed another $25 million deficit. They said, look, we're really not confident with these numbers. We don't think it's going to pan out this way. We really think we should take a step back. And Councilmember Zach Sapone, one of the members on the council majority, he said, look, we're going to have to take the administration by their word here. And the council did, and they ultimately ran into another $13 million hole. And now they're saying, look, probably for the foreseeable future, we'll be dealing with future budget deficits as well.
Likewise in Seattle, last week, they unanimously approved their $9 billion budget for 2026. And I think what's interesting about it is that, first off, this is the first time in years back that the city council unanimously passed the budget, but it avoided layoffs. But by doing that, it raised fees, increased taxes, I think, as a lot of cities and jurisdictions in Washington have done. Mm-hmm. They've implemented that 10-cent sales tax increase to fund public safety. Seattle did that. Seattle voters also approved a business and occupation tax restructuring that targets the larger companies within the city, further pushing them outside of Seattle, as many have noted, flagged concerns with as they go across the Lake Washington over into Bellevue. Mm-hmm. But we're going to keep seeing these fees increase because they so desperately don't want to avoid cuts to staffing. For instance, the Seattle Department of Construction Inspections, they're increasing construction permitting fees by 18%. Now, that wasn't unanimously passed, as 3 city council members opposed it, saying this is just going to harm housing development in Seattle because no one's going to be able to afford to build here, right? And they did so. They increased the fee anyways because they didn't want to cut staff that they said will be needed when the good times are around, right? So we're in the midst of a bad time here when it comes to development in Seattle, I suppose. But it's just interesting to hear what's going on in Spokane and compare it over here in Seattle. Now, I am interested to see what the conservative minority has said about this, right? They want to take a step back. But do any of these key players, I'm talking Spokane, I'm talking the mayor, administrator, council leadership, what are their concrete plans for 2027? Is there anything set in stone yet?
Well, half of the council minority it was just replaced in the most recent election. So come That's January, right. There's only going to be one conservative on the dais as opposed to 2. And even with 2, I mean, they didn't have enough voting power to push anything through that they wanted unless they got some of the majority to sign on to them. And historically, from what I've seen, the majority is much more willing to increase spending and taxes along with it to get by, rather than make cuts. And I understand it. You know, it's a hard thing to fire someone to say, look, you're not going to be able to put food on the table for your family anymore because we've overspent and we need to address that. But at the same time, you're taking a salary that's maybe, say, depending on the position, $60,000 to $100,000, and you're raising taxes to cover your bottom line. And then you're thinking ahead too, trying to think to cover your bottom line the year after that too. And that's on the backs of your residents. I'm sure the average resident doesn't want to go to City Hall and say, you, it's time for you to go. I can't afford you. But at the same time, can your residents continue to afford tax increases year after year after year? I mean, with the way the city passed this most recent budget, leaving that fiscal cliff, they set themselves up for a position come next fall when they're balancing the budget again to say, look, are we going to cut staff or are we going to increase taxes again? And with the way the majority has voted time and time again, I don't think it's crazy to say that we might see more tax increases down the road.
You know, there's also another option here, and that's taking a a close, hard look at what programs are working, right? Now, Seattle, we don't do that too often, right? But Seattle City Council member Maritza Rivera publicly said that it is time for the city to really take a good hard look at these programs, see what's working, because then we can cut it, just to make those savings and not have to increase taxes or lay off other staffing, maybe for like essential services, right, whatnot. But is this happening in Spokane? Is the Spokane's majority taking any kind of looks at programs effectiveness last year, or have they even barely mentioned any outcomes at all in regards to this?
I'm sure they are taking a look at programs. So this is the middle of their biennial budget. They passed the biennial budget last year, a 2-year budget. This is halfway through. So technically, these are budget modifications on an entirely new budget. They're working off of something. So there were some major cuts made last year to things like the community-oriented policing program, stuff like that. But for the most part, pushing the budget through the door this year was passing those 2 taxes, cutting around 15 employees, and moving funds between various accounts wherever possible to help get that red number back to zero, to get a black number. But they're looking at cuts. I think one thing you mentioned, the forecast earlier, that's something that we're going to have to come back to time and time again, is that with this $13 million deficit, the mayor and the city administrator were saying, look, if we don't make substantial modifications this year, not just a few cuts or some bridge funding to get through, this budget deficit is going to continue to compound over time. And 6 years from now, come 2031, we could be anticipating an annual deficit of over $50 million. Now, that's substantial. And every time that they pass a budget where they raise taxes without making substantial cuts, they're just getting closer and closer to that outcome. And come 2031, 2030, 2029, whatever year they choose to address it, it's going to be really painful for the council and mayor at the time, not to mention the residents who become used to these service levels and then experience significant cuts to get back down to a sustainable spending level.
Now, when you say that 13 million deficit, that's for 2027, correct?
That's heading into 2026. So that's expenses compared to revenues for 2026. So state law requires municipalities to pass a balanced budget ahead of the start of each year. So technically, the council could have said, look, we're going to listen to the dozens of residents and business owners who told us that we shouldn't pass these tax increases, and let's wait another 2 or 3 weeks, find some additional cuts, maybe rework our plan, and then pass a budget. But they didn't do so. They pushed it through early because they're supposed to swear in a new council member later this week. So they're worried that in swearing in a new council member, it would throw a sword in all their negotiations, and that they'd pretty much have to start from zero.
Well, I can tell you, in Seattle already heading into 2027, it's a $140 million budget deficit, which is lower than the near $200 million for this year. So we're making some progress, but I say that jokingly. Obviously, it's going to be an issue that I think you and I will be here same time next year, Tim. But good coverage as always. Looking forward to seeing what Spokane does next year to deal with its budget woes, as I will do the same in Seattle. Tim, thanks for sticking around, talking to us, and to our viewers at home, thanks for watching. See you next week.